Hi, and welcome to Emerging GovTech in support with the Dynamic Coalition on Blockchain Assurance and Standardization of the United Nations Internet Governance Forum. We are gathered here today to have a critical discussion about the intersection of voting, elections, and the future of trust. I'm a strong believer in communication and transparency. So I want to set the tone for this conversation by confirming the vital role everyone here plays in the big picture. The decisions we make today, and I'm specifically including the audience, will define our future. There is a consequence for every action that we take and for every action that we fail to take. So, who am I to guide this conversation? I'm a believer in God. I'm a mother. I've served in fiduciary capacity as a licensed real estate agent for nearly a decade. I have founded businesses and employed hundreds of people, providing them the dignity to work to feed their families. I have studied business, computer engineering, cybersecurity, and blockchain governance. But above all those titles, I ask myself, am I serving my purpose? My purpose is to help cultivate a future rooted in the greater good. And that brings us to the word of the hour, fiduciary. To the government's officials listening, you're not just employees, you are trustees of the public trust. Your role as a covenant, legally and fiduciary, must act with the highest standard of care. If we know that a tool exists, a technology that can secure the vote, audit the results, and prove the truth, then our duty is to explore it, not out of fear, but out of commitment of excellence. Today, we are going to explore how we uphold that duty together. And to help navigate these waters, I have brought together an exceptional crew of experts. Amelia Powers Gardner, she is the engine room. As a county commissioner, she is the operational trustee who has faced the storm of public scrutiny and successfully deployed these systems live. Linda Hutchinson, Linda Hutchinson, she is our navigator. With over 125 elections under her belt, she ensures that our course meets the highest standards of insurance and certification. Eugene Morozov, he is our visionary. He sees the horizon and builds the governance frameworks we need to get there. Let's start with the foundation. We have often heard the word blockchain, and some people hear crypto, but I want us to hear custody. Eugene, for the election officials listening who want to protect the integrity of their records, how does this technology help? When we talk about immutable chain of custody, we aren't talking about magic. We are talking about evidence. How does this technology bring sunlight to the process?
Felisha, thank you for the question, and hello, everybody. My name is Eugene Morozov, and I'm CEO of DeVOTE DAO LLC, a company specializing on indisputable elections. I'm also the author of the book just published called 2026 DLT and Blockchain Governance and Implementation Playbook, which answers your question directly. Government officials should educate themselves about what technology is available today, how to safely and responsibly implement this technology in their processes with several safeguards built in, allowing them to, first and foremost, to keep their fiduciary responsibility indeed at the level they were elected to do, and utilize the benefits that you mentioned of the technology. But if you implement it safely, blockchain can allow you to make voting indisputable by a combination of all the code available for public review prior to elections, by a proper educational campaign of voters of how this improves the process, and by massively increasing the voter turnout. What can blockchain add? Immutability, first and foremost. Nobody can really amend any results of elections because they have been immutably recorded. However, although this is a critical factor that blockchain brings, there are many others. A little later, we'll talk about, hopefully, about the election life cycle. And there are various components in it where blockchain can be properly applied. So that's a generic question. I don't know if my colleagues want to add something to this.
I'd be happy to talk a little bit about the election life cycle. When talking about blockchain in elections and voting, we're really talking about more than just the actual voting procedure. And we have a slide here that we use in GBA's voting working group that we've comprised by talking to election officials. So in the before voting elements, that includes voter eligibility and registration, defining contests, candidate nominations, and then building the ballots. And we're all familiar with the voting window, which is launching voting, voter authentication, marking and returning ballots, and closing the voting at the appropriate time. And then finally, after voting is a very important aspect of tabulation, reporting, auditing, and certifying the results. So each of these areas, we all have some experience in applying blockchain as a solution, and it could vary widely based on the jurisdiction requirements and legislation. So with that, I'll turn it back over to you.
Wonderful.
Yeah, I'll follow up with Linda there on that. And that is that when we say blockchain voting, the vast majority of the people are thinking of exactly like Linda said, that casting their vote on a blockchain. But I think it's important to recognize that there's a lot of records keeping and auditing, and blockchain can play a role in every aspect of this. So everything from tracking eligibility to chain of custody of a ballot, to who had access to what software and when, and ensuring that the record of who had access to what software and when is immutable and is not been changed. That's just as important to improve the integrity of your result as it is to prove that nobody had access to the process that wasn't supposed to.
That's a good point. Wonderful. Okay. And I want to address a very real sentiment in our country. There are many people listening right now who say, I want paper ballots like we had in 1970 because I can see them. And I want to validate that feeling. The desire to see and to verify is not wrong. It is human. Amelia, you deal with these constituents face to face. How do we bridge this gap? How do we move from asking them to have blind faith in a system to giving them power to verify it themselves? How do we give the voter a tracking number for their vote?
Mm-hmm. And these are great questions, Felisha. So I think first, one of the things that we have to do as election administrators is we have to be willing to admit and recognize that there is no perfect system. Even the system that a lot of these people want us to go back to, prior to 1970, Lyndon B. Johnson, it's a proven fact that he stole his Senate election in Texas on paper at the polls on election day with hand-marked and hand-counted ballots. He was sworn in as a United States Senator. By the time this was discovered, he'd already been serving in the US Senate. He went on to be the Vice President of the United States and to become the President of the United States when John F. Kennedy was assassinated, and then really dove our country into a horrific time in the Vietnam War. And so, and our country has survived survived this, but every time I see somebody say, well, the only way to get rid of a voter fraud, or the only way to have confidence in elections is to move back to hand-marked, hand-counted paper ballots, I'm reminded of the fact that we literally have a United States president who stole an election on hand-marked, hand-counted paper ballots. But we have to admit that there's no perfect system. A hand-marked paper ballot is not perfect. A ballot marking device or remote ballot marking device, which is what the Voatz app that Linda has, can be considered a remote ballot marking device. That's not completely fallible either. And so what we need to recognize is that every system is going to have some weaknesses. And what we want to do is just continually and incrementally get a little bit better every year. We need to be willing to admit that we don't have a perfect system, and we need to be willing to try new things and move forward and get a little bit better every year. Blockchain has a way of doing that, in that with a hand-marked paper ballot, hand-counted ballot, if you're not there in person counting those ballots, you didn't put eyes on those ballots. How do you have trust in that? Whereas with a blockchain system, that can be transparent. From anywhere, you have the ability to go in and see that system and audit that system. But in order to have trust in that system, you need to understand that it's immutable. That means it cannot be changed. So if people don't understand the fundamental characteristics of the technology, then they're still not going to have confidence, right? They're going to be afraid that these electronic numbers were changed. Unless they understand the underlying technology and that it's impossible to change those numbers, that they are immutable, that you can actually see that, they're not going to understand. Now, moving forward, we can get complete transparency for everybody, not just those that are standing there counting those ballots, when we have an immutable record. And blockchain gives that to us in a way that people from all over can audit it. Furthermore, we can also look at this using cryptography. You as an individual could ensure, you could track your ballot utilizing cryptography, but still securing your right to a secret ballot if you know how to track your vote. Now, you're not going to be able to track everybody else's votes. You'll be able to see how they voted, but you won't know who voted that way. But if you have utilizing cryptography, we should be able to track our own vote. That's not possible on a paper ballot, but it is possible utilizing cryptography on an electronic ballot. We just need to do it in a way that that allows transparency and trust. And in order to do that, people have to understand the technology.
If I may add a few words to that, please. Amelia is absolutely correct that due to the legacy legal system and the practices actually in many different jurisdictions, step-by-step approach is the right way to go. However, in order to know which way to make those steps, I think it's useful to potentially see the big picture, or what we call the art of the possible, where eventually, and this is a bit futuristic, admittedly, we can run elections with no man in the middle. And that is that general public will be able to verify all the software, all the code, everything that is going to be used, get comfort prior to elections. And then during elections, everything could, in the future, be run by code only, including all of the elements of the election lifecycle that we discussed. It can do voter registration lists. It can do the voter notifications and education. It can check against any legal and regulatory pronouncements that have been made anywhere. It can conduct elections through voters' mobile phones, and it can indisputably prove the results while allowing for what's called in U.S. Constitution a permanent separation of voter ballot and voter affidavit. That is achieved through a technology called zero-knowledge proofs, which essentially is the only way to guarantee, mathematically guarantee, that the vote has been received as intended by the voter, that it has been counted as recorded as received, and then it has been counted as recorded. Those are the three major steps required to ensure public trust in the process, and all of that is coming in the not that distant future. In my opinion, what remains to be done is for the legal system and for the public sentiment to catch up with the technology possibilities today. Thank you.
I'd like to add something to that. First of all, Amelia, Eugene, it's great working with you on the vision and the practical applications. From my perspective, in working with a number of elections in, well, the United States, Canada, and Mexico, but there have been many implementations to sort of get to the art of the possible that Eugene's talking about. And those could be as simple as recording artifacts on chain, because as Amelia mentioned, the blockchain is an immutable record. It gives a chain of custody. And so for example, it could be paper ballots at the local jurisdiction, and then for election night reporting, those are rolled up, and those certifications by the local hand-counted election officials could be recorded, for example. So there's a whole gamut of things that can be done in order to familiarize and make individual jurisdictions and governments comfortable with blockchain solutions, and the cryptography is really one of the most important things. And it's already been successfully done where, in elections I've worked on, where we utilize zero knowledge proofs. And because of that, the individual voter is able to verify his or her ballot is received and recorded. And in addition, there are public audits being held, where, as Amelia mentioned, any academic or party official or anyone else could see the entirety of the ballots that were recorded, but not how individuals voted. And both of those things support trust. And as I like to say, the importance of an election, really the purpose of an election, is to not just confer the winner with the office, but to convince the other candidates that they had lost fair and square, as long as their supporters as well. So it's really, that's what the trust aspect of it is. Conferring the winner with legitimate position, and others understanding and being able to verify that that was correct.
Wonderful. Excellent. So that touches on some of the questions that we had as far as voting without revealing how they voted as well. Okay, so wonderful. So now to the listeners and the leaders that are listening. You might be feeling that this is a massive undertaking, and you are right. You cannot build the ship while you're already sailing in a storm. You need a blueprint before you launch. We talk about blockchain maturity model, BMM, as that map. Eugene, what are the indicators that a jurisdiction is actually ready to begin this journey? And for those listening who feel unprepared, what is the first step that they can take today?
Thank you for that question. In my book about this, I strongly recommend that the first step is judging whether any improvements, any changes are better than a non-blockchain alternative. We, in fact, introduced the term NBA, non-blockchain alternative. And that is very important. First and foremost, people that you're referring to have a very strong fiduciary responsibility to the voters. And they have to make sure that whatever modernization of technology they do is based on standards, has been reviewed by a group of independent experts, that anything they do is publicly verifiable, completely transparent, and most importantly, it leads to measurable improvements in the process, whether that being cost or reduction of errors or simplification of certain processes, or as can be demonstrated, you can actually mathematically prove accuracy of the tally. So a big role for standards, some of which are developed by the Government Blockchain Association, which I'm happy to be a member of for a few years, and my colleagues on the podcast here as well. And there are further potentials. Users can go and have the code that they plan to use formally verified by experts, which essentially also provides a mathematical proof that the code delivers exactly what the requirements or the specifications were before the development team started working. So a combination of public awareness campaign, experiences of other people, such as Amelia, and also a large amount of information available about the technology, including about zero-knowledge proofs and the blockchain itself, and all the formal mechanisms that are used. All of that should be looked at before pulling the trigger. So fiduciary responsibility here is guide number 1. Standards, number 2, best practices, number 3. And also I would strongly recommend that whenever the modernization plan has been adopted by any government, they bring in someone who is deeply involved in the...
I think we lost him. While we get him back, one of the things I don't mind addressing is when you ask the question, how do we know if a jurisdiction is ready to do this?
Right.
One of the things that Eugene said is spot on, and that is that we need to judge implementation of any new technology, not against a utopia, but against, is it an improvement from what they're currently doing? So this is a challenge that I continually had when I was working to let our overseas and military members and people with disabilities vote utilizing a blockchain app. I would continually get some like computer science doctoral student from MIT that would come in and be like, oh, this is the worst thing in the world. And I'd be like, really? So you realize these people are currently voting using Gmail, right? Like the State Department literally tells them not to use their government email because it filters out the attachment, which is their ballot. And so these people today are using Gmail.
Oh, wow.
Do you think that this is safer than Gmail? And all of a sudden you get like this doctoral student that would be like, well, yeah, this is better than Gmail, but it's really bad. I'm like, okay, but it's better than what we're doing today. And that's one of the things that a lot of people don't realize. This is what's unique in the election space. So I'll give you a quick example. There's actually a cartoon that you can look up that says, you ask an aviation engineer, is it safe to fly in airplanes today? And they'll say, yes, we put 2 or 3 checks and balances on everything. Like, could a mechanical system fail? Yes, absolutely. A mechanical system could fail. However, we put 2 to 3 checks and balances in everything. And statistically, the likelihood of something failing is significantly lower. You're actually safer flying on an airplane than you are driving in a car because we put so many checks and balances in place. On the flip side, you take like a computer scientist that has no clue how we run elections today, and you say, should we use blockchain voting? And they're like, no, there's a chance somewhere in Mars that it could be hacked. And it's like, well, you realize that these same people are voting using email, and they're like, what? We had no clue. And so I think that's part of it. It's like, when is a jurisdiction ready? Well, if they evaluate the technology and it's better than what they're doing today, then yeah, you should probably implement it.
Yeah, Amelia, you are spot on. And I would like to add on a couple of things. So I'm very familiar with your use case, and it's called UOCAVA, but it's Uniformed Overseas Voters, whatever. But it's the people who are living abroad and maybe voters with disabilities. So that is one of the best use cases that have been implemented in the United States already, and as well as other countries that I've worked with. So it's not it doesn't replace all in-person voting. It doesn't, require everybody to not use paper ballots. But for this particular constituency provides a much better implementation solution, more secure, more private than anything out there. And I want to put a plug in here for the voting working group, the GBA's voting working group, of which Eugene is on and Amelia has participated as well. We generated a report a few years ago now. It's called the Remote Election Technology Report, and it evaluated 7 different methods of remote voting for overseas military and also voters with disabilities who needed assistive technologies. And that's out there. And it would be a great first step for any jurisdiction who wanted to say, well, what kind of use case could I start with to see that blockchain voting is a better solution than what we're doing now, just as Amelia's done in
if I can add to that also, a few years ago, actually following the pioneering efforts of Amelia, Linda, and the company Voatz, we've published a paper called an unbiased comparison, which compared step by step all known and legally allowed modes or methods of voting in the United States. And we came to the inevitable conclusion that blockchain at least is equal and in many instances better than the paper alternative. So there's great foundation to those efforts that you guys are doing, and I take my hat off to what you've done. Back to you. Thank you.
Wonderful. Those are great points that we brought up here. Okay, so let's talk about when the waters get rough. Close elections, recounts, accusations. These are the moments that keep officials up at night. Currently, a recount can take weeks and cost millions in legal fees. Amelia, how does a blockchain-based system perform under this pressure? How do we turn a 3-week recount into a 10-minute audit? How does this technology help lower the temperature of the entire nation?
Yeah, it's funny, in the election world, the night before an election, we have almost like a toast that we say to our fellow election officials, and it says, "May your lines be short and your margins be wide." Because if your lines are short and your margins are wide, then you can call an election on election night. You don't have to worry about provisional ballots, and people are not questioning your results, and you have to have a very tight margin in order for there to be like within your recount, right? You can't have somebody that just calls for a recount because they want it. You have to be within a certain margin because of a statistical likelihood. So when your lines are long or your margins are thin, how do we handle this? A blockchain vote is very helpful because anybody can go in and audit it themselves. When we did blockchain voting as a pilot, we didn't audit a statistically valid sample. We audited 100% of our blockchain votes, and individual citizens could sign up to be auditors. And so during the five elections that I oversaw as an election administrator, where we utilized a blockchain system for our overseas and military voters and people with disabilities, we audited 100% of those, and any average person could come in and vote. And we didn't find any discrepancies or inconsistencies in any of them. And the reason that was so valuable is because the people that wanted to criticize us, I would just say, sign up as an auditor. Sign up as an auditor and tell me if you can see a problem with it. You don't have to be here physically in the office in order to do that. And so it can make that it can make that process a lot more transparent, a lot more accessible. And then you've got the immutable record to prove it. I think one of the most important things to remember is that you don't actually have to steal an election. You just have to convince people that you did. And when you've got a blockchain record that's immutable, someone can try to claim they stole the election, and you can say, okay, well, here's the record. Show me where you manipulated it. And that gives us this immutable record. But once again, this goes back to what I mentioned earlier. People have to understand the technology well enough to know that can't be manipulated.
Yeah, I can add some color to that. So in the art of the possible version, there is a combination of open source code, which anybody can come and verify following the principle, anybody verifies anything. There are mechanisms to provide independent assurances, such as blockchain maturity model by the Government Blockchain Association, or a formal verification of code process conducted by one of GBA members called the Provendo and others. And then, of course, you ultimately want to not to defend yourself under any accusations. What you should provide is a mathematical proof. Mathematics stands above politics, and you can explain to any partisan view that the tally can be proven to be correct based on a combination of technologies. So I hope we are going towards that state where the LEOs, local election officials, will not fear the heat and the pressure that Amelia mentioned, but rather be very comfortable by simply providing proofs. Thank you.
Yeah, I can give another example here. So radical transparency really helps people grow with confidence. And one of the ways that they've handled this in the state of Idaho is there's a couple of jurisdictions in Idaho that scan the image of every single one of their paper ballots. They scan the image and they post it online. And they do this in a way that they say, here's the actual image of every single ballot. And they tell people, if you don't believe the results, go look at, you can do this. You can scan every single ballot. However, in the state of Utah, we have a Utah State Supreme Court ruling that says we can't do that. In the state of Utah, the state constitution says that you have a constitutional right to a secret ballot. And anything that could possibly cause anyone to determine how you voted is a violation of our state constitution. And so we had folks that wanted these ballot images, and they petitioned the government for the ballot images, and we actually have a court decision barring us from putting these images online. And so as Eugene mentioned earlier, in some cases, in the state of Idaho, they can put the image online. And so they don't have to necessarily utilize a blockchain technology to get radical transparency. They can just put the image online. And then if you want to make sure that the image wasn't altered, you could take the online images and do an audit of the paper images and look at them. But in the state of Utah, I can't do that. I'm not necessarily opposed to doing that as an election administrator. I actually think the more transparency we have, the better. But I have a court order from a judge saying I can't do that. And so in that case, for me to be able to take like an electronic hash of that image that doesn't actually take the image and records that on a blockchain and then lets people go in and verify the tally, like the result of those without actually seeing the image, that's the next best thing that I could do.
You make a really good point, Amelia. In my experience working with hundreds of elections now in all different jurisdictions all over North America, the state by state and vary so much in terms of their legislation and requirements. And so I think in one of the things that election officials and other government people watching this might want to consider is, what are the specific challenges for their area? Because it may not be possible to change, legislation readily, but there might be a use case that could be done to support transparency with blockchain in whatever implementation that they do have.
Yeah, it's a good point. No, I know there's a lot of people that say, well, then let's just go and make national laws. Well, that's unconstitutional. It's specifically, this has been given to the states. But what a lot of people need to understand is that the fact that we have 50 different states that have 50 different laws that oversee their elections actually builds in election security. Because there isn't one way across the country that you do this. And even within each state, there's different jurisdictions that do it in different ways. Because of that, for a nation state like a Russia or a North Korea to come in and manipulate our elections is impossible because there's so many different variations and variables involved. It actually creates election security. So you do see a lot of people that say, well, let's just do some big, national law that would actually compromise our security.
And there's a parallel there to blockchain, which is by design a decentralized system. And so you're saying the benefits of 50 states doing something unique and within their control. It's also something that we think about with blockchain, that it's a decentralized system, which reduces the ability for one or two bad actors to manipulate something.
Yeah.
Right, that's correct. Okay. And if we get this right, if we honor our fiduciary duty and deploy the right architecture, what does the morning after the election look like? Linda, paint the picture for us. When the dust settles, we need to know that the people trust the results. In your view, what does public confidence actually feel like after successful deployment?
Well, I can speak to experiences that I've had with elections that I've been involved with. We need to first talk about hybrid voting, where there might be in-person and electronic remote voting, or all electronic voting, where that utilizes blockchain. So for example, and this is sort of a unique challenge about implementing something incrementally, is that there might be 90% of people who are voting in person on whatever legacy system that are in use, or paper ballots alone, and then have to integrate something else. So it's a little bit of a challenge to say that I, as a vendor working on just the blockchain portion, could attest to all of the other areas. But I think that there's an opportunity to store immutably elements of that, as well, as Amelia has given an example. So, but in the case where we've done all, and in some cases, municipal elections and other things such as unions and so forth, all of the data would be, well, actually, one good thing is not having the election go beyond the election day. I mean, this is one of the big challenges that we've had in the United States, where mail-in ballots come in days and days and days after. And with a blockchain system, we implement, and anyone would implement, a fixed time and date where voting closes, and then that's it. And then you can decrypt and have all of the tallies available, and then make them available as well for auditors. So I think in that case, you have answer on election night. You have the ability for others to cross-check or verify as they like. And that is a step away, advance from where we are in many cases now.
Yeah, I mean, and on that note, so for example, in the state of Utah, we used to have the rule that you had to have your mail-in ballot had to be postmarked by a certain day. And so you would have several days after the election that the ballots would come in. Now, once again, if your margins were wide, it didn't matter, because if 90% of the vote is in and somebody won by more than 10%, by more than a 10% margin, it honestly doesn't matter if 90% of your ballots are in. You can call the election if you've got a bigger, a bigger gap, right? So once again, this goes back to, may your lines be short and your margins be wide. If you've got a wide margin, you can call an election on election night. But like, let's say there's 17 races on the ballot. When I was the county clerk, we only had one race that we couldn't call. We had the other 16 were called on election night. It was not a big deal, but we had one we couldn't call because it was in less than a 1% margin. Now, the state of Utah changed our law so that instead of saying your ballot needs to be postmarked by election day, it now says it has to be received by 8 p.m. on election day when the polls close. So you can change your laws a little bit in that aspect. But with that said, even if you've received it by that night, because it's on paper, we still have to verify it and process it. Whereas if it was on blockchain, we would know, was it recorded by 8 p.m. on election night on the blockchain? After that, we could just cut it off and we could say, okay, now we're going to do this. And then you could have your results on election night, whether or not you had a close margin.
Mm-hmm.
If I can add to that, please. The book I wrote is aimed at Leo having a very good night's sleep after election night. If you do things from fiduciary perspective, if you use best practices, if you use open source code, if you have availability for public audit of anything you do, if you can have zero knowledge proofs or similar technology allowing for guarantee of voter anonymity, if you use mathematics to formally verify the code you use, then I see no reasons for a responsible official to lose sleep. Thank you.
Yeah, Eugene, I'd like to add something to that too. And I'm thinking about the work that we've done at GBA with the blockchain maturity model. We have a voting. Okay, so first of all, the blockchain maturity model is a assessment method for solutions implemented on blockchain, where it can get an objective look, an evaluation on what level of trust that one could have about that solution. It's important for members of the government who are perhaps considering putting an RFP out for any kind of solution to say, oh, this might be something that could give me a little extra confidence, or even make it part of the RFP itself. But in addition to that, the voting working group, of which Eugene and others are on, have come up with a voting supplement for that, so that specifically blockchain implementations of voting could be evaluated objectively with third-party blockchain and election experts to give a true separate, I guess I would say, the hype from the truth in any kind of blockchain solution, especially in voting elections.
Those are good points. Okay. Amelia, Linda, and Eugene, the depth of the knowledge you shared today is exactly what this industry needs right now. If our listeners want to deep dive or dive deeper into your specific work or read your latest reports, where is the best place for them to find you?
I can start. I think we've included hyperlinks to a lot of information that is kind of the background of what we discussed today in the announcement for this podcast. But I would certainly encourage people to read at least two documents. One is called Modernizing Technology with Blockchain to Prevent Government Fraud, Waste, and Abuse, which is going to be presented on the Capitol Hill in Washington, D.C. on March 3rd of this year. And I encourage everybody, it's open to come and listen in or to view the recording, where a substantial body of work is going to be presented to the public, describing all known and impactful previous attempts to implement a blockchain in governments at different levels for different purposes. So that should definitely serve as the guideline to begin with. The second document is the book that I mentioned earlier, which actually is a practical implementation playbook for government officials and corporate officials as well, how to safely and securely, without undue risks, implement this technology while keeping your fiduciary responsibility intact and, in fact, enhanced and supported. So that would be the second recommendation. And the third one, I encourage everybody to take part in the work of the Dynamic Coalition on Blockchain Assurances and Standardization, which is a part of the Internet Governance Forum of the United Nations, which is positioned to help and guide officials all over the world, not just in the US, about the best practices and possibilities here. So reading the documentation and following the process of that global organization would also, in my opinion, would be a good advice. And then last but not the least, people who decide to move on, I'm sure could reach out to one of us or other experts, and we'll make sure that we provide the best advice in terms of practical implementation. Feel free to do so. Thank you.
I just add, in fewer words, gbaglobal.org. And you can we'll have links to all of those references and that Eugene mentioned. And there's also the voting working group, which has the reports we talked about earlier, including the remote election technology report, the voting supplement for evaluating blockchain solutions.
Yeah, I think the two reports that Linda just mentioned are probably the most important on that aspect of it. When it comes to blockchain voting specifically. Beyond that, I've been doing a lot of work with a group called Conservative Agenda for Democracy and analyzing how do we continue to improve incrementally election laws and election processes and procedures in states in ways that work for that state. I'm a firm believer in the idea that a businessman from Northern Virginia is going to vote very differently than a mother of five in the state of Utah. And we need to allow for individual citizens to exercise their constitutional right in a way that works best for them. And so I've been working with this group, and I've been working most recently with a group called the Joseph Rainey Center for Public Policy, and they're about to release a scorecard. I think right now it's got like 8 or 12 states that it has scored. The goal is to get enough funding to score all 50 states, but it scores them on a combination of accessibility to voting. If we make it so hard for a person who has a right to vote that they can't do it, we've basically compromised their constitutional right. So how easy is it for them to vote? But at the same time, how hard is it for people to cheat? So how secure is your election while balancing that with accessibility? Keep in mind, every person that votes affects the outcome of election as much as every person who doesn't vote, right? Every vote that isn't cast affects the outcome of election as much as every vote that is cast. So we want to balance accessibility and protecting people's constitutional rights with making sure that the results are accurate and safe and secure. And so the Joseph Rainey for Public Policy is, I think, later this month releasing the first draft of their scorecard that shows in each state where do you stand on those two metrics and what's your overall score. And then they're launching a cohort to work with state legislators in states that want to improve their score, to say, how do we help you improve your security as well as your accessibility? The beautiful thing about blockchain is it does both. It increases security and in many cases also increases accessibility. So that's an exciting thing about this technology.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you all. To our audience, you have just heard from the specialists who are pioneering this technology. And this brings us to the final piece of the puzzle. We know that transforming an election system isn't just about buying one piece of software. It's about orchestrating the governance, the legal compliance, and the technology into a seamless mission. If you are a leader looking to build that complete ecosystem, you don't have to navigate this transition alone. You can also reach out on LinkedIn or through the GBA. Let's look at your blueprint and build the right solution together. I'm Felisha Stevenson. Thank you for listening to the Emerging GovTech.